There's something happening quietly across America, and most people rarely talk about it. Right now, according to the U.S. Surgeon General, about 1 in 3 adults in the United States reports feeling lonely. Among older adults, the numbers are just as concerning. Researchers estimate that nearly 1 in 4 Americans over the age of 65 is socially isolated, meaning they have very limited contact with friends, family, or community. That's millions of people, not in one city, not in one state, across the entire country. But here's something even more surprising. Health researchers have found that chronic loneliness can affect the body in ways similar to serious physical risks. In fact, some studies suggest that the health impact of long-term loneliness can be comparable to smoking about 15 cigarettes a day. Not because loneliness is dramatic, but because it is quiet, persistent, and often invisible. You can live in a comfortable home. You can have children who care about you. You can speak to people occasionally and still carry a deep sense of being alone. This is what many experts now call a quiet epidemic. Not a failure of character, not a personal weakness, but a growing social reality. And if you've ever felt that quiet weight yourself, there's something important to understand. You are far from the only one. Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Daniel. Daniel is 78. He lives alone in a small apartment outside Pittsburgh. His days are quiet. In the morning, he makes coffee the same way he has for years, a little too strong, just the way he likes it. He reads the newspaper at the kitchen table. Sometimes he watches the morning news. Nothing about his life would look unusual from the outside. His daughter calls once every couple of weeks. His grandson sends the occasional text message. Neighbors nod politely when they pass in the hallway. Technically, Daniel is not completely alone. And that's exactly why his loneliness is so easy to miss. In the afternoon, he often sits by the window and watches cars pass, families coming home from work, children riding bikes, people walking their dogs. He doesn't resent them. In fact, sometimes he smiles. But there is a quiet moment that arrives each evening, usually around dinner time. The apartment grows still. The television fills the room with noise, but not conversation. He warms up something simple in the microwave, one plate, one chair, one voice in the room, and sometimes, in that silence, Daniel notices something difficult to explain. It's not the absence of people, it's the absence of being needed. No one asking for advice, no one telling him about their day, no one saying his name from another room. This is the kind of loneliness many older adults experience. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just a slow quieting of the social world, a loneliness that exists, even while life continues moving all around you. To understand what Daniel is experiencing, we need to talk about 2 words that often get used as if they mean the same thing: loneliness and isolation. But in psychology and public health research, they are actually quite different. Social isolation is about the outside world. It refers to the objective condition of having very few social contacts, few conversations, few visits, very limited interaction with others. Someone who lives alone, rarely leaves the house, and has little contact with family or friends would typically be considered socially isolated. It's something we can measure. Researchers look at things like how many people you talk to regularly, how often you leave the house, whether you participate in community activities. Loneliness, however, is something else entirely. Loneliness is subjective. It's the emotional experience of feeling disconnected, even when other people are technically present in your life. You can speak to people every day and still feel lonely. You can live with family and still feel invisible. Loneliness happens when the connections we have don't match the connections we need. Think of it this way. Isolation is about quantity. Loneliness is about quality. You may have several people in your life, neighbors, family members, acquaintances, but still feel that no one truly understands you or shares your daily emotional world. That's why someone like Daniel can appear socially connected on paper. A daughter who calls occasionally, a neighbor who says hello, a few polite conversations in the hallway, yet still experience deep loneliness. Because loneliness isn't simply the absence of people, it's the absence of meaningful connection. And for many older adults, that distinction matters more than we realize. When researchers began studying loneliness more closely, they discovered something striking. What many people thought was a private emotional struggle was actually happening on a national scale. According to data from the U.S. Surgeon General's Advisory on Social Connection, nearly 1 in 3 adults in the United States reports feeling lonely on a regular basis. That's tens of millions of people. Among older adults, the picture becomes even clearer. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that about 1 in 4 adults age 65 and older is socially isolated. That means limited contact with friends, family, or community. But loneliness itself may be even more widespread. In a national survey conducted by AARP, about 37% of adults over the age of 50 reported feeling lonely. That's more than 1 in 3 people. And these numbers matter because loneliness doesn't only affect emotions, it can also affect physical health. Public health researchers have found that prolonged loneliness is associated with increased risk of heart disease, depression, cognitive decline, and sleep problems. In fact, the U.S. Surgeon General's report noted that the health risks of chronic loneliness can be comparable to well-known physical risks like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, not because loneliness is dramatic, but because it slowly affects the body over time. Higher stress hormones, poorer sleep, less physical activity, weaker immune response, all of these patterns can emerge. When people feel disconnected for long periods, and yet, despite how common loneliness has become, many people still believe it is something they should simply handle on their own, something personal, something private, something they shouldn't talk about. But the data tells a different story. Loneliness is not just an individual experience. It is increasingly recognized as a public health issue, one that affects communities, families, and entire societies. And understanding that can change the way we think about it. When people hear the word loneliness, they often think of it as an emotional experience, something that lives in the mind. But modern research has shown that loneliness doesn't stay only in our thoughts. It moves into the body. When someone feels chronically disconnected, the nervous system begins to interpret the world differently. The brain shifts into a subtle state of alertness, almost as if something important is missing. Over time, that sense of social disconnection can activate the body's stress response system. Stress hormones like cortisol may remain elevated longer than they should. And when that happens repeatedly, over months or years, the effects can accumulate. For example, researchers have found that people who experience prolonged loneliness often show higher rates of cardiovascular problems, including increased risk of heart disease and stroke. Sleep can also be affected. Many people who feel lonely report difficulty falling asleep or waking frequently during the night, not because of muzz, but because the mind has trouble settling. There is also evidence that loneliness can influence inflammation in the body, which is linked to a variety of long-term health conditions. And cognitively, some studies suggest that persistent loneliness may be associated with higher risk of memory decline later in life. Now, it's important to say something clearly here. Loneliness itself is not a disease. It is a human signal, a signal that the mind and body use to tell us that meaningful connection is missing. In many ways, loneliness functions like physical hunger. When we feel hungry, it doesn't mean something is wrong with us. It means the body needs nourishment. And when we feel lonely, it often means the human need for connection has not been fully met. But when that signal continues for long periods without relief, the body begins to carry the strain. That's why public health experts today are paying closer attention to loneliness than ever before. Not simply because it hurts emotionally, but because over time, it can shape how the body itself functions. So the question becomes, if loneliness has such powerful effects on human well-being, why is it becoming more common? Part of the answer lies in how society itself has changed. Over the past several decades, the structure of everyday life in many countries, especially the United States, has shifted in ways that quietly reshape social connection. One major change is geography. In earlier generations, families often lived close to one another. Children grew up, found work nearby, and remained part of the same local community. But today, opportunities frequently require people to move. A son may build a career in Texas, a daughter may settle in California. Grandchildren grow up hundreds or even thousands of miles away. These decisions are not wrong. They are often necessary, but they can stretch a family relationships across long distances. Another factor is the pace of modern work. Many adults today juggle demanding careers, childcare responsibilities, financial pressure, and constant digital communication. The result is a kind of time scarcity. Even when love is present, time and emotional energy can feel limited. Then there is the shift toward smaller, more independent households. Sociologists sometimes refer to this as the rise of the nuclear family, a household centered mainly around parents and their children. While this model has many advantages, it can also reduce the everyday presence of extended family members, such as grandparents, cousins, and longtime neighbors. Communities themselves have also changed. People move more often. Local institutions, neighborhood clubs, churches, civic groups sometimes play a smaller role in daily life than they once did. And technology, while powerful in many ways, can sometimes create the illusion of connection without the depth of real human presence. A message, a quick reaction, a brief call, helpful, yes, but not always enough to replace the warmth of shared space. When all of these shifts come together, distance, busy schedules, smaller households, changing communities, they can create a world where meaningful connection requires more intentional effort than it once did. And that is one reason why loneliness today is not simply a personal struggle. It is, in many ways, a reflection of the way modern life itself is organized. When people experience loneliness for a long time, many begin to wonder if something about them is wrong. They may think, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I should just be stronger. But loneliness is not a character flaw. It is not a sign that someone lacks resilience. In fact, the capacity to feel lonely is deeply connected to something very human: our need for connection. Human beings are social by nature. For thousands of years, survival depended on belonging to a group, family, tribe, community. Being connected meant safety. Being isolated meant vulnerability. So the human brain evolved to treat disconnection as something important, something that deserves attention. In that sense, loneliness is not a weakness. It is a signal. Just as hunger signals the need for food and thirst signals the need for water, loneliness signals the need for meaningful human contact, and signals are not failures, they are information. The problem today is not that older adults suddenly became weaker. The problem is that the social environment around them has changed faster than the human brain itself. Our minds still expect a certain level of everyday connection, conversation, shared time, a sense of belonging. When those things become scarce, the emotional system responds, not because we are fragile, but because we are human. Understanding this can be deeply relieving. It shifts the question from, "What's wrong with me?" to something much more compassionate. What kind of connection might my life be missing right now? And that shift can change the entire way we relate to loneliness, not as something to hide, but as something to understand. If loneliness is partly shaped by the way society is organized, then the good news is that society can also change. And often, the most meaningful changes begin in very small places. A community center opening its doors for a weekly gathering. A church hosting a simple coffee hour after service. A neighborhood group organizing a walking club in the park. These may seem like small things, but for someone who has spent many evenings alone, even a modest moment of shared conversation can make a meaningful difference. Across the country, many communities are already beginning to recognize this. Senior centers now offer classes, discussion groups, and social events designed not only for learning, but for connection. Libraries host book clubs and local gatherings where people can meet others with similar interests. Volunteer programs invite older adults to share their experience, mentoring students, helping in community gardens, supporting local charities. And something interesting often happens in these spaces. People who once felt invisible discover that their stories still matter. Their knowledge still matters. Their presence still matters. Because belonging does not come only from family relationships. It can also grow from shared activity, shared purpose, and shared time. No single program will solve loneliness entirely. But each small opportunity for connection adds another thread to the social fabric. And when enough threads come together, they create something powerful. A community where fewer people feel forgotten, and where aging does not have to mean facing life alone. Before we finish today, there's something I want to say very clearly. If you have ever felt this quiet kind of loneliness, you are not the only one. Across cities, suburbs, and small towns, millions of people are navigating the same quiet spaces. Different homes, different lives, but often the same feeling. And sometimes the most powerful step toward connection is simply realizing that your experience is shared. If any part of today's conversation resonated with you, you're welcome to leave a small note in the comments. It doesn't have to be long, maybe just a few words like, "I understand this," or "I'm listening." Sometimes even a short message can remind someone else watching tonight that they are not the only person sitting quietly in their living room. And in our next conversation, we're going to explore something that many parents carry silently: the feeling of not wanting to become a burden. Why so many older adults begin to silence their own needs, and how that quiet instinct, while often coming from love, can slowly deepen loneliness. Until then, be gentle with yourself. The desire for connection is not a weakness. It is one of the most human things we carry.